All right, you guys, we are back. This is Courtney from Willow's Bloom, and we are in my garage. Super excited with this new podcast setup for a very, very important video, which I haven't really seen people do justice of quite yet. And that is a US Pluto return, which is happening pretty much right now in February.
It's happening right now.
Right now as we speak. And so I have my friend Ricky, fellow astrologer, and Dill Pickle, also known as Dylan Suggs. And he is our historian because I suck at history. So we're just bringing all the guns blazing today. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves and kind of say where people can find you?
Yeah. I want to let people know my name is Ricardo Zever. You can catch me on Instagram and my YouTube, and honestly send me a personal email, Ricardo_Zever, Zeveert. And if you want to gather reading or gather more information, send me a DM. You can reach me there.
Yeah, you can reach me. Matrix Breakers is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So I cover news and events as well as all kinds of various topics. And then you can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. My name is spelt Dylon. And then my last name is Suggs, Suggs. And so if you look that up, you can pretty much find me anywhere. I have a personal page on pretty much every social media.
Beautiful, guys. So today we are going to cover a long video, which is going to kind of talk about the events that happened prior to the birth of the U.S. And then we're going to talk about what Pluto looks like in the United States birth chart. Then from there, we're going to go into stuff about the financial history that involved transits with Pluto that I definitely think will kind of give us a perspective of what could be to come now that we're having this return. Then we're going to look at what this return can possibly bring for us, as well as a little bit of the Neptune opposition, which is happening right now as well.
Oh, yeah.
And then we're going to talk about, we're just going to wrap it up and talk about the future and these possibilities that we might face. So this could be a long episode. There will be time codes in the description box below, but let's go ahead and jump right in and stay on track.
I want to jump into the context because I'm really excited, not only just have you both on this channel, but also talk about one of the most impactful and probably the biggest event that can happen for United States history, but even for just a country. We're talking about a Pluto return. There's really no bigger transformative event that can happen in someone's chart. No human actually can experience this unless you're living 248 years. But the fact that we're literally in the moment of this repeating cycle, we're talking about a whole death and rebirth within a whole country's infrastructure and how it impacts not only just the collective, because every single human is kind of a drop in the ocean of the collective energies of Pluto right now. So there's a lot of events. You can look at 2020's eclipses and all that, but it's really looking at like we are going through a transformational renaissance, a new America to some level at this period in time. So it's really excited to like break down, and I just want to love on Dylan for being and joining us, because he's definitely someone, if I know anyone that knows American history with a passion and reminds us what it means to be a good patriot, this is your man right now. So to bring him on this channel and talk about it is definitely exciting, because, you know, as we've done the research here, this is a moment that should be looked at and reflecting on America's people. Like, what can we do to really change how things have worked? And Pluto brings up stuff, and I don't want to go too far the rabbit hole, but with, you know, the South Node in Scorpio, North Node in Taurus, we are trying to like reformulate what this is going to look like. So really pumped to jump in.
All right, so let's start off by talking about some of the historical events that led up to the birth of America. So Dylan, do you want to kind of set the stage about what was happening around that time?
Well, the American experiment started really, of course, we go as far back as like the late 1500s and then the 1600s, right? But when we lead up to the events into the American Revolution, I think of the French and Indian War, which was I would say is about the second or third real world war, because, you know, this new world that still existed was being fought over various empires that included the French, of course, that had French Canada and Louisiana all the way down the Mississippi River. And so I think of the French and Indian War as a preface, because the British were defending these colonies that they had, you know, the 1,000 miles away. And so this justification for the war they had fought with the French wasn't just in America, although it started in America over the Ohio River Valley. And this is important because this is really the first time that a conflict truly broke out in the New World in the beginning. Usually Europe has their own conflicts, and then it spills over into the Caribbean.
What year was this that you're talking about?
1754.
Okay.
So
Right.
1754 to was it 1762 or so?
About
It was really
20
a 7 years war because it
before.
was this in Europe. It's called the 7 Years' War, and then in America it's called the French and Indian War. But what's most important in that context is that after that war, the British had a lot of debt. And that debt, of course, the Rothschilds are involved in that debt, but this is war debt. And war debt is always a very peculiar topic because war costs a lot of money. And when it comes down to it, the American taxpayer was picking up the bill for this debt. And that's where you get the T-tax, the Stamp Act, and the stamp tax with the Postal Service. And you get all the paper tax and all these various ways to raise money to pay off the war. And that's kind of the important element, I think, leading up to it. And so a lot of Americans were okay with that, actually. And I've talked to Ricky about this, but the majority of Americans were on board with being British citizens. And so it wasn't until really the late 1760s and 1770s, there was a lot of reformation, I think, in the mind of the American. The idea that this American colony could sort of govern itself. And I think that's where we get more transformative. If you want to add anything to that, I can go on and on just how that unfolded.
Well, I think that's a really great place to leave it off because it does make a lot of sense why we have Pluto in the second house of the natal chart of the US because we were really founded as a country in a way that is going against some kind of financial oppression. And Pluto is all about manipulation, oppression, power, control, and the kind of darker sides of humanity. And so having these financial taxes that come off the back of a war is very Plutonian in general. And I do think that the US was obviously formed because we didn't want that. And so we're going to start to see as Pluto now has almost a 250-year cycle, has almost completed this chapter all around the zodiac. We're seeing the story kind of wrap up in a way that it brings up this stuff from the past. So we were formed because we didn't like the taxation. We didn't like what was going on with the level of control and manipulation. And Pluto in the birth chart is also opposite Mercury. So I do think a lot of this is about or related to like mind control and manipulation of the narrative as well. Can you say anything about that, like in terms of the news sources and kind of how word spread at that time? What was, manipulation in the media a common occurrence?
During that time, America was a very literary society. They were literate. They read a lot. They read a lot of news, and a lot of publicists like the Sons of Liberty and, of course, Benjamin Franklin. He owned a newspaper. That's how he got famous. And, you have a lot of different ideas were printed on paper. And in order to write, if you try to read a newspaper from like 1768, you wouldn't be able to read it. Like, it's so literary and beautifully written that it's like Old English, but it's also perfectly written because back then everybody read so deeply. And I think that, news media was still controlled. They had the Majesty's paper and things like that were able to distribute information. But London newspapers were very different from Boston, Massachusetts, for example. Boston was a hotbed of patriotism. They actually were that's where they started the Sons of Liberty, and that's where a lot there and in Philadelphia where a lot of people started to get this new idea to be independent. But really, that was still a really fringe idea. Not everybody agreed on becoming America, becoming its own country. Right. Really, they just didn't want the taxes. They saw themselves as British people, and they saw themselves as having British rights. But the British didn't see them as British. They saw them as American. And is this already this sort of clash between class and even ethnicity and race and culture. And so, I think that with the media, even back then, I would say that the media is very, very important because I think of, people speaking their mind, and I think of one of the most important documents ever written at that time was Thomas Paine's Common Sense, which came later. This was like in 1775. This was already when violence had already broken out between the British Empire and America. But Common Sense, the whole book basically was saying that we need to be our own country. And it was the first ever real pamphlet or like document that said that they gave real reasons for us to be our own country, for us to be our own people, and how we could survive. But again, like I mentioned, it's still a very fringe idea. Whispers in taverns and conversations in very secret places to even say that you would ever want independence, because it would result in some of the worst torment ever that the king had offered.
Yeah, and I think that Pluto opposite Mercury can really talk about that these kind of, especially with Mercury being in the 8th house of taboo.
Right. Well, there's a lot of things as I'm looking at this Thomas Paine chart. We're just looking at 1775. We're really looking at, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto all doing a grand Earth trine. So there's like new revolutionary ideas to formulate something that's never been done before. And Neptune in Virgo is also kind of imagining like this could be a thing. It's funny. It's like common sense. It's like what's practical in this situation. But in other words, it hasn't really come to resolve itself. So it's kind of funny. It's been foreshadowed as even just with the date of that book. And I don't have it exactly, but nonetheless, like that year, we could be looking at what is being absolved there, because when we wrote the declaration, we're not experiencing the Pluto opposition. It's only until like we've signed the declaration, because Mercury moves pretty fast. But nonetheless, it just seems like that's really a time where like we're reformulating the structure. We're really reformulating what is possible. And even though that's kind of going on in the back of the scenes, if you will, it's not getting traction. So like what Dylan's saying is like a vast majority they're identifying British. They're not really like American yet. To like it's really coming down to the wire on major events.
A lot of colonies were still intertwined with the economy of Britain, like New York. New York was very loyal to the British, and that's why the British decided to invade New York, second to Boston.
So this concept of division, I think, is clear in the chart, and that is because also Uranus is lying right on the descendant. So I do feel like this is the planet that gets triggered. I mean, it gets triggered during the Civil War. And it's also just kind of inherent in our country that we tend to have some level of division
Rebellion.
between, some people believe in separation and taboo, and especially centered around money, given that Pluto's in the 2nd, opposing Mercury in the 8th. So a lot of this is like people having these fringe beliefs because of financial powers, because people are not okay with that. But then with Uranus on the 7th, on the descendant, it's like, well, there are outliers. There are these different opinions, and people are like kind of fighting against each other in a way. So that's all represented in the chart. I also want to talk about Pluto making a trine to Neptune in the chart. Did you want to say anything about that, Ricky?
Yeah, I did want to touch on the Uranus element. Is that we have Uranus in 8 degrees Gemini on the descendant for America when we signed the declaration, which basically means like we love sharing different ideas and being really radical, and so we're a very Uranian culture. We get a new idea and it spreads. We're like the culture fanatic. We're kind of like what's hot kind of vibe. And although it's like different ideas, which Gemini wants to pick up and experiment with new ideas, it's really just radical. So I definitely just see that kind of in its own birth part of our culture. But to talk on what you're talking about, Neptune trining Pluto in the chart. Yeah, so that's actually wonderful because it's in an Earth sign. It's in Virgo and Capricorn, which is all about what can we literally build and create as a new system. And when Neptune's there, we're actually getting like, can we envision something? I'm just seeing common sense. It's retrograde at 22. So literally Neptune, while common sense was written, was in a retrograde period. It goes forward when the declaration is made. Does that make sense? So the idea, the dream has been given, but till Neptune comes forward, meeting the day of the declaration is where it's kind of like initiated to society. But since it's trining Pluto, it's invoking this new concrete, this new foundation that's created on the world plane for something that's never been created for. And it's just cool because, Neptune in any other sign can open imagination. But when we're talking Virgo, that's a rare alignment. It's a very rare kind of like these two outer planets trining in Earth. That's a once kind of, that's a big deal. I can't do the math on it, but I'm going to throw spitball, maybe like a 40-year kind of thing or something. So, but particularly in the sign of Capricorn, I'm just seeing like this is an idea that's never been done before. and it's just merging. It's just kind of foreshadowing itself. It hasn't really hit as hard, but it does create that America helps us just symbolically being an entity, being a thing. It always envisions us of what is possible. Like our essence in our birth chart as America is trying on like we can create things that have never happened before. We can create new foundations. So that's the beautiful thing I'm getting from this. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to kind of summarize what we're looking at in the birth chart, we're specifically honing in on Pluto in the second, which again is related to a lot of issues around control with money, finances and resources, anything tangible that we're using essentially. And it's opposite Mercury in the 8th house. So there is quite a bit of this kind of rebellious or alternative way of thinking that could rub people externally the wrong way, especially with Uranus on the 7th.
Hitting their comfort zones, like very much. That's an aggressive. Pluto opposing Mercury is very like you're triggering me all the time kind of vibe.
And I do think that could be interesting because actually to go back a little bit, Pluto was the transiting Pluto that we're experiencing now was exactly opposite Mercury in 2020. And what did that bring up? Intense amounts of fear, intense amounts of media manipulation in one direction or another, and just people really getting into this kind of just negative headspace. And so I think everyone is really caring for their families and their well-being because that is the American dream with Mercury and Cancer. That's what we all want. But it's also kind of wrapped in fear around stability and money and finances. And so I absolutely think the Pluto return will trigger this aspect, as well as the trine to Neptune, which gives us more optimism and faith for what we can create. But is it possible? Because Pluto returns are often linked to endings. And so does that mean we're ending to have a stronger new beginning, or does that mean we're ending and another country is having a stronger new beginning? And that's something that we're going to talk about at the end.
I do want to address a couple things because we're dissecting the chart, bringing up these like major pieces, but to talk about it just in general, you know, we are a Cancer. America's a Cancer. Like we're a lovable American dream, come and have the best life, you know, kind of situation. With Jupiter and Venus together, that's beautiful. Like, you know, this is a place where you can really like have that joyful kind of family dream of like what America is. And Mercury is there, but since it is retrograde, it brings up like there's still like part of the karma, something that we need to kind of like uncover. There's still karma for us to kind of reconsider, read over, that some things need to be understood. But we are symbolically shining a light into like, what does it mean to have the good life? And yet, though it is opposed by Pluto, you know, this is kind of triggering our symbolic, how are we representing ourselves in that American dream? Because it's also like with opposed by Pluto, it looks great, but it's also like, are we being able to take care of the financial, the financial situations, the resources? In Pluto in the second house, it's also trying to trigger like, is this the highest you can reach? There's always dynamics to reach higher and reach that higher ground. So that's just kind of context of how I'm personally viewing America's chart. So.
I want to add something, you know, during the wars, 8 years. So 1776 was just the beginning. The document wasn't even written yet before the war started. We had no aim. We were an aimless war. It was just a rebellion at first. And so just to give you an idea, the population, it's very important for propaganda to, it's the propagating of an idea. And the British, the king used this as a way to, he had petitions go out in various cities like Boston and New York and stuff. And the governors of these places would go out and say, you have to sign your name if you're loyal to the king. And there were various things that they were gifted. And so you had to sign your name, pledging your loyalty to the king. And so while some powers try and move the tyranny comes in forcibly, but at the end of the day, they need consent. And this is still a reality to this day. They need consent. So for people to like sign their name and loyalty to the the English crown at that time, basically was a way of consenting towards that level of whatever governance they were going to receive from the King of England, Charles. And so I wanted to mention how important that is even to this day. People are consenting to the tyranny they live under. and to the levels of which they go into it, that depends. But at the end of the day, like the majority of Americans were not fighting the revolution. And I want to mention this before we move on, is that 3% of the population of America, 3%, it was 2 million something, was the whole population of America. Only about 70,000 was the largest part of the army itself fighting the war. Only 3% of a population of America actually fought in the war, put it all on the line, and they beat the greatest empire that to ever exist, okay, arguably, but to ever exist. So I want you to understand that, like, it doesn't take many people to defeat a tyrannical system. It just takes a few, and it takes some crazy ass ideas that totally revolutionized the concept of government. The idea of monarchies and things came from feudalism, and before that was just kings and other emperors. So like, this was a true renaissance of ideas, and there's something to take note.
Love it.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I wanted to talk next about some key economic events that Dylan and I kind of outlined, looking at the astrology, looking at what that meant for society. And I want to go back all the way to 1913 and then kind of take it up to 2008 market crash. And the reason I'm doing this is because the Pluto return in the second house of finances is going to revolutionize our economy in some kind of way. And so if we can look at the past and see kind of what Pluto was doing all of those years, we might start to gain an understanding of what the future could hold. So first of all, we have the Federal Reserve starting in 1913. And before I get into the astrology, did you want to just briefly mention, kind of like the concept of the Federal Reserve and what that looked like?
Well, it all started in 1786, really.
Briefly.
But, I know. So just so you all understand the historical context of the Federal Reserve, you have to realize that banking has been the number one issue in America since the birth of it. And even though we beat the British in our American Revolution, the Rothschilds, who were the largest financiers of the war, they essentially owned the first national bank of America, and that had a charter and it ended. Okay, and this is what caused the first Bank of America ended in 1811. The War of 1812 happened just after that. The second national bank was started in 1815 after the end of that war. And so I just wanted to mention, and that goes on, by the way. Andrew Jackson in 1836, he ran his entire election. You know what his slogan was? It said, his presidential slogan in that time was Jackson and no bank. That's how important banking has always been to Americans. They didn't trust banking institutions. They had this they knew that the mischievous nature of banking and financiers using loans, like shark loaning is what they call it today in modern theory, but you shark loan by giving a loan to a person who cannot afford what they are buying. This is the 2008 financial crash. So there's a lot of things that led up to it in 1913, but they abolished that bank. Abraham Lincoln had the Greenback program, if y'all just want to look into that as well, after the Civil War. He didn't want it to be financed by America's enemies. America's enemies were coming in to try to finance a war, just like they've always done. And so it's really a really deep historical context when you look at banking in the United States in general. We always should just distrust banks. But in 1913, it was this new idea. They called it a Federal Reserve, and it was, if you read a book called The Creature at Jekyll Island, which is an island right off of the coast of Georgia, is where a bunch of financiers came together, including the Rockefellers, but a bunch of senators and financiers and bankers at that time came together and decided on the Federal Reserve. That's where they made the whole idea. So we should really look at that chart and what that in that day as well. And then leading up to that, in the passing of the act in Congress, in which you'll get into in December 23rd, 1913, that established the Federal Reserve. But the ideas of that was like, I mean, they've been going back decades trying to get a new national bank, a bank that would loan money to the U.S. Treasury, and then the U.S. Treasury would be put on the taxpayers, because not only was the Federal Reserve established in 1913, but the income tax, which was a totally disgusting thing to all Americans,
right,
that was established as well with the establishment of the Federal Reserve Bank. The idea that they could tax your income. The most absurd thing ever, that they could tax your income. It also came into a place in 1913.
You would say those were kind of signed at the same time? Because we're looking at, so I have the chart, and we'll get into that. December 23rd, 1913 is when Woodrow Wilson signed that act. Would you say the income tax?
It's in that act.
Oh, it is.
The income tax came...
So it's the same chart.
It's the same exact act, and that's what came in. It all came together.
So
like
if I may, the immediate thing I'm looking at is when we wrote this act, Neptune is on that Mercury retrograde. So it's already kind of fogging up what we think is like, it's going to feel good. It's kind of illusionary, like going to kind of solve the whole situation. And that means it's opposed this Pluto, exact 27. It's exactly opposed. In other words, it's kind of like, it's not all glitters is gold situation. And that's not a joke, because you have Neptune retrograde 27 oppose our Pluto 27 retrograde. So that's interesting. Not even that. Uranus is
Neptune is opposing the U.S. natal Pluto.
Correct. On the day that the Federal Reserve is signed.
So, okay, and I think that means a lot, given that the Federal Reserve is not actually federal, right?
No.
It's, yeah. So
there are shareholders of the Federal Reserve. And I want to say this, that the owners of the Federal Reserve, even back then, again, Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Warburgs, families
rich
owned,
families.
they started the bank. It's a big bank.
Started a bank, printed money, and gave it to the government, and they put the word federal on it so that people think it's part of the government, but it's not.
It is it's out of New York, but they have multiple Federal Reserve branches.
Still today, that's exactly how it is. And so the opposition with Neptune to Pluto kind of shows how much of a farce it really is. You know, like it's a lie. The word federal is just a complete misnomer in this case.
Another detail, another aspect that's really noteworthy is Uranus is an Aquarius on our south node. 5 degrees Uranus Aquarius and 6 degrees Aquarius. And what this means is almost like radically becoming a little bit more like for the world's progressiveness, like, you know, for kind of inclusive for everyone. Uranus is in full power in Aquarius, but it's on the south node. It's almost like maybe not fully looking and considering the picture of taking care of ourselves. Actually, it's kind of outsourced, if you will.
There was a bank crash in 1907 that led to this. It's always these systematic crashes that there's a problem, reaction, solution. It's how the tyranny works. Problem, reaction, solution. It's a cycle. 1907, that crash, essentially what people were begging for was they blamed banks. They blamed banks for the problem that they were facing. So the federal government they basically said, hey, look, we're gonna propagate this idea of the Federal Reserve by saying it's a national bank. It'll be regulated. It'll help regulate all those other banks, and it'll help establish order in the financing system, so we don't have this happen again. And it's the vaccine of economic problems.
And Pluto at that time was also conjunct Venus, so it's not just like, hey, we're redoing the financial system, but it's also in a way in which it's more regulation, more control, something that they probably, like you said, weren't used to with that new income tax.
Trying to rebirth how to feel and make money, how to be in that comfort place. It's comfortable to create this, but
it's also an exact trine. Pluto was transiting an exact trine to the natal moon in Aquarius in the 3rd house. How would you interpret that, Ricky?
What exactly?
So transiting Pluto at that time not only was conjunct Venus, but was an exact trine with the natal moon in Aquarius in the 3rd house.
I'm seeing for the Federal Reserve, Pluto is at 0 degrees Cancer. So, I mean, it is somewhat in a trine. I mean, it is communicating to us, but it is funny because it's in our 7th house. So I'm seeing it is a big relationship to us in the world. It is creating a relationship to the world. And as far as Cancer at 0 degrees, it is foundationalizing what we are creating as home and what we're creating. Because in Cancer, Pluto and Cancer also really aggressive time that opens up to the World War II kind of zones. Pluto and Cancer is pretty disruptive. It literally triggers what you know and hold as like home and security and all those things. So when it's coming over Venus, it's kind of like it's kind of rebirthing Venus in a way, but it's also like really triggering and really opening up the comfort zones of where our finances are. So I'm just seeing a lot of kind of differentiating of feelings towards that. Into the moon, though, it is hitting us. If there is a trine there, it is moved over like 4 degrees, but it's still there. I would say this is kind of reactivating our principle to make a change because we're definitely
Okay.
looking at an answer.
So we kind of got cut off there. So what were you saying, Ricky?
Yeah, we're just to address your question with the Pluto trining the moon. That does trigger America to act and to make a change. But I really see a lot more. I see so many aspects. I see Saturn retrograde in Gemini on Uranus. Got to make a quick change. Got to refoundationalize something. Got to build something, especially with Saturn. Trying our natal Saturn, how can we connect to the world? I just see a lot of inflation, Jupiter and Capricorn on top of natal America Pluto. We're kind of getting out of proportion. We got one way to fix this kind of situation. So it's not like it's a total bust, but there is a lot of things that don't seem formulated. Last thing I'll say is the South Node is on our natal Neptune. So we're really in the fog. We're thinking it's something that's really going to build something, and it's with Virgo and Neptune on the South Node. Rare situation. It's definitely like we think it's going to fix it. We're building it, but is it built in the best in full vision of everything? We're not seeing all the dimensions, which is trying to be like that Chiron and Pisces North Node at the time that the Federal Reserve was signed. Is this really the best thing that we could create for the overall thing? Nah, we got to kind of send it. Let's do it. Winter solstice, sign the paper, kind of went through it. I'm not saying it's a total bust. It's just you can see how it's hitting the chart in a very interesting comfort zone where the Federal Reserve came out of it.
All right, let's move on to the Great Depression. And obviously you can see these are some really key moments in our economic history. So the Great Depression happened in 1929. I'm just going to briefly talk about the astrology and then I'll let you get into the history. So during that time, I'm primarily just looking at transits of Pluto. Like, what is Pluto doing in its cycle? Because I want to see how it's coming full circle. So at this time, Pluto was on the sun in our chart. So
It's a little off, but
but
it's close.
I think that our charts are a little bit different. I think
I'm running November of 1929.
it's definitely
And it's 19 degrees Cancer, which it is on the Mars for the Federal Reserve. So that's interesting if there's a flow of money.
so
It's definitely.
yeah, within 3 degrees. So definitely impacting. And yeah, and then at that time we also had Pluto making a square to Saturn in the 10th house. So that also is really big because Saturn is the ruler of our financial sector. So anytime this planet is aspected, especially by square, we can see some massive change to economic status. And with Pluto and Saturn combination, there's always some level of loss, or with Saturn, some level of like drying up or shortages. And that's exactly what what happened during the Great Depression. So will you kind of give us a little bit of context about what was going on during that time?
Yeah, so the Great Depression, I mean, it's caused by many different factors, but ultimately it was the Dust Bowl and the farming and the idea of just like this monoculture, this mono cropping. And I think that, when it came to with things leading up to it, you had a lot of, obviously, like a really prosperous time. The Roaring 20s is how they call it, right? And so this is an idea that, like, again, the banking system's working, things are functioning, it's flowing really well. And remember, the banking system is who controls who gets loans. And who gets loans are the businesses that actually survive. And then if you can't get credit and can't get loans as a business, you can't survive. And so what happens is these interest rates were increasing at that time. And so the loans were stopping. So it's like the money printing was stopping at that time. And that's why there was no growth. And again, this is like how capitalism works. It only works when proper financing is available. And so, yeah, I mean, just on a brief way, like the Great Depression was a combination of environmental factors that led to obviously like wildfires and droughts and things that people just could not get food. I think it was like 25% unemployment. And I mean, we're getting to that period like almost right now.
Yeah, what's been the unemployment? What's been the highest unemployment rate we've seen?
That was the highest.
25.
Yeah.
During this time.
Yeah, during this time.
So
yeah.
That's a 2022.
That was back in
no, like this last
1929.
2 years. Like, what's the highest rate we've seen?
We had about 10.
10.
We got close to
half,
10.
Roughly half.
Which is a catastrophe. You can't have people not working. We have that issue right now, which is people not working, or everybody wants that perfect job. It's cozy and from home, whatever. But you can't have an industrious society not working, and you can't have them having no jobs either. And so we can get to that later, but
we'll get to that later. But yeah, so is there anything else that you wanted to add about that? That's perfect.
Obviously, we were going to get to the Gold Reserve Act, so that's 1933. But the Great Depression was between those, about 10-year period.
What was a good 1 or 2 year reference you'd say where the Great Depression really hit hard, right after that?
30, 31.
I'm looking at 30. The biggest noteworthy thing that I see for the Depression chart is at least Pluto raging through that Mercury. But more so than that, I just see Chiron and Taurus. Which is our wounded finances, our wounded stability and foundation, our possessions. People that are born with that have the Chiron and Taurus. Sometimes there's hoarding, not knowing if you're going to have enough later. And the psychology of people is are we having enough? And I've heard that being a situation for people born in the Great Depression. So I'm kind of seeing that radical situation with the 1930 and then 1931.
Uranus was also squaring Venus, so it's a huge degree of instability.
And America.
For everyone across the board.
In our fourth house.
Yeah.
So. All
right. So a lot of instability, a lot of drying up with that Saturn square Pluto. And you can see in any Pluto cycle, it starts off with, actually, I'm going to get to this a little bit later, but something I do kind of talk about is Saturn and Pluto coming together. And a whole cycle with that. So this is one checkpoint of that cycle with Saturn square Pluto. So you can see kind of big chapters unfold during the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, square, or opposition. And so this was one of those big checkpoints. And when COVID hit in 2020, Saturn was conjunct Pluto, beginning a brand new cycle of this. So again, another chapter marker that we can start to see unfold. So another really big one that I actually didn't even know about, Dylan just shared this with me this morning, is that in 1933, it became a felony to have gold. So the government took everyone's gold and made it a felony. And again, I'm just going to quickly go over something I see at that time, which is Pluto on Mercury, which you were just talking about, Ricky. So Mercury has a lot to do with trade and currency and
exchange of goods. Exactly. And it's often representative of, I feel more of the people exchanging goods, or maybe even the stock market to some extent. But Pluto on Mercury, I feel is saying that there is again a level of control and domination and manipulation of how things are moved about. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what 1933 was about?
1933, the Gold Reserve Act was the solution to the Great Depression. It didn't work, obviously. The Great Depression continued for another 5 or 6 years. But again, problem, reaction, solution, where you have the idea that the Federal Reserve was now the official bank of the United States. And so they said, hey, look, we need to know how much gold is in this country. We want to count all the gold. And so when this act was signed into law, they said you have to turn in all of your real wealth. Think about gold as real wealth, what we've known as wealth universally since human civilization has existed. And you're supposed to turn in your real wealth in for these what's called Federal Reserve notes, this paper dollar that still exists today, right? And you're supposed to turn this in as a swap. It's a scam. So you're getting these Federal Reserve notes, and then Franklin Roosevelt said that this is only temporary. It's how it always starts. 2 weeks to slow the spread. It's only temporary, and we will give you your gold back as long as you have your receipt that said how much gold you were. But of course, American citizens were very skeptical.
Imagine if someone's like, hey, give me your house and I'm going to give you a piece of paper.
Right.
Your deed or something.
Yeah. Saying, here's a deed. And that hasn't happened before. You're going to be like, fuck no. Get out of here.
Right. So everyone was already starting in that revolutionary pattern of oh, well, this is fuck that. I'm going to bury my gold and stuff. And so then, of course, the government knew that they would do that. So they said, we're going to make it illegal, actually, to have gold, right? We're going to make it illegal to leave your house during those 2 weeks. It's that same concept of tyranny. And so, yes, ultimately, remember that our government, it was not legal to own gold until Gerald Ford, what was it, like 1975 or something, even 76 after Nixon. So that's another thing. But it was not legal to own gold. And it was on TV, one guy, not to fast forward, but I was on TV. This guy was holding a brick of gold, and he said, "This is illegal to have, but I have it in my hand right now. Why is this illegal to have? This is real wealth." He made this really good point. But again, that's a count how many years that is. There is a huge period of time in America where it was illegal for the private citizen to own gold. Not just the private citizen, by the way,
35.
all businesses too. It was very normal for businesses to like hold their gold and store their gold. Remember, banking worked like the notes. Just to clarify, your paper was always representative of gold. The early on idea when you had horses and no cars was that it was always inconvenient to have so much gold on you, and it was dangerous, right? And so the paper notes ultimately represented gold that was stored at a bank safely. You have bank robbers and all these different things that they go for the gold in there, not the paper notes. It's always the gold and the silver and the jewelry and the lock boxes in there. Because every time you came in, you would, and this is what caused the Great Depression, is called a bank run, which is where you're turning in your notes on in for gold. And this is very important for everyone to understand. The idea of a reserve means that the bank, let's say your local bank, let's say you turned in $1,000 worth of gold, however many ounces that was at the time.
Right.
Well, the bank took this gold that you gave to them and loaned it out and did different things with it, and they held a reserve of only about 10%. So when you came in and said, "Hey, I want my $1,000 worth of gold," they said, "Well, we need like 10 days for us to go get your gold." Where is it? No, it's not here. It's somewhere else. And so it's called fractional reserve banking. For anyone who wants to look into that economic concept, the idea that a bank can hold a fraction of what they say they actually have on the balance sheet, where the rest of it is being loaned out or whatever. And so these bank runs, these panics, they happen all over the world, by the way. When people go in to take out all their real gold, that's what always causes economic problems, because the banks, well, they gave the gold away, or they're using it for different reasons.
What year would you say that kind of element?
That happens all the time, but I would say obviously in the Great Depression, people were like, "Oh, I want to hold all my gold," and again, like you said, you just said it, Taurus, where whatever it is you mentioned, how
hoarding, the fear of losing stuff.
Dylan doesn't know astrology.
Yeah. So like
Chiron in Taurus is possession of wealth, and just think Taurus gold is definitely, and then like Chiron's like, I don't want to lose that, like, I want to hang on to it. So just to kind of
in 1933, when this took place, when it became a felony, Uranus was right on Chiron, actually, our natal Chiron.
I'm looking at, and then Saturn is on the south node with Uranus, like it was on the south node when the Federal Reserve. So it's super south node time. So
Uranus on Chiron, I think, is kind of like a shock to the system.
Who are we?
Definitely, and with Aries especially, it's like you said, there's an identity there. So your inner power.
I can almost imagine, like, kind of in Aries, it's radically trying to fix something. I always see like Uranus in Aries, because we experienced it a little while ago, is very much like jumping into action, or very jumping to solve an issue. But I also see there's a little bit of like some healthy autonomy of like, I have this much gold, and like now it's illegal and I don't have it. And I feel like that kind of ego inflating. Like
it's a very personal placement to have Chiron in the fourth. It's like the energy within the home, the personality of the people. And I do think being in Aries, we have this independent nature, but there's also wounding there, and that was really stimulated by that Sun and Uranus transit. And then with Saturn on the south node, this is typically a time of bringing about things from the past and things that are really restricting from the past. So old paradigms that actually are quite outdated, like taking somebody's money from them and lying to them. So not only was it triggering, but it was just not progressive by any means.
I definitely just see Saturn on the south node is like trying to be forward thinking, and it's just like losing your sense of autonomy. Like and we're also seeing again, this is what's the most funny thing. Federal Reserve We got 1913, December 23rd, and then I just looked up January 9th, 1933. I would like to know the exact month. Same thing, Neptune on the south node in Virgo, the same place of thinking we're building something, and there's all this Virgo energy, but the south node is there. It's like a fix that's not looking at all the options. It's like just kind of like, yeah, we're just going to take that away. We're just going to get rid of that problem without seeing the broadness of the situation. And I'm just seeing that kind of south node time is like, it's going to benefit everyone.
And Jupiter is on Neptune in the ninth. So during that time, it's like, oh, here's the higher ideal that we're striving towards. Here's what you guys are contributing to and what we're building.
It's trining the Jupiter of the Federal Reserve. It's like all in placement. It's kind of weird. The energetics or the consciousness or the ideologies are kind of carried through both events.
Yeah.
And it's not just the common theme. I mean, the astrology is kind of lining up like wherever the intention is on this situation, it's kind of feeling itself into the same resonance. It's just, I'm talking about an exact combo, talking to each other. So
yeah, definitely. What we can continue to see here is this theme around being sold this idea that isn't actually what happens. And maybe we have those notes today. I mean, we have dollars today. So I guess to an extent it does happen, but it's not quite like what they say it is. And like you said, there is some level of power and control and a scam to this. And I think that really reflects the trine that's happening natally between Pluto in the second house and Neptune in the ninth. It's like we're striving to this ideal, but we get to control your money because this is the ideal that we're telling you we're going for. But we have all the say in how it unfolds. And it's like, well, I don't know. With Chiron and Aries in the fourth house, we want to be independent. We want to think for ourselves, but then also at the same time, we're allowing for some level of control. And we can see this come up again and again throughout the history, and we're seeing it even now. So let's move on. Okay, next we're going to be talking about the Bretton Woods in 1944. So this is when the US dollar became the world reserve currency. So Dylan was telling me that this is basically saying that everything that is traded is based on the value of the US dollar instead of on a gold standard. So definitely linking everyone now to the United States. So all the world economies are sort of contingent upon how well we are doing and how well the US dollar is doing to an extent. So I'll talk about the astrology in a second, but do you want to kind of explain what that looks like?
Yeah, so in 1944's, like the war was coming to a close, and in Bretton Woods, New Jersey, World War II. What did I say?
It's closing.
You just said the war. I'm just specifying.
Oh, the war. Yeah, of course. So World War II was coming to a close. And so all these nations were coming together trying to reconfigure the world. And the world was a huge mess. Europe was no longer the center of power anymore. It was very clear that America was the true victor of this war because they were able to hold up themselves financially. They weren't spending all their money. And really, not even a single bomb dropped on the American mainland when you think about it. All these other countries in Europe had that issue. And so it was just an agreed upon thing that America, given its status in the world, they would use this US dollar policy and they would use that as the world reserve currency, as long as this was an agreement, though. It's called a Bretton Woods agreement. It's not a Bretton Woods Act or Bretton Woods, a say. This is really an agreement because the agreement was that America had to hold up fiscal policy. And that fiscal policy had to say that the US dollar will always be tied to gold. It would always be tied to gold. And so the French, the English, the Spanish, all these different countries in Europe, they dumped their gold and they deposited their gold into the Federal Reserve Bank.
That's crazy.
Just like we did. So the Federal Reserve is now there's a lot of central banks, just so y'all understand. There's a lot of central banks. Now there's even bigger ones. But the Federal Reserve was becoming the most powerful. And again, while Courtney is saying Americans generally, we don't want all these wars. We always vote against these things. We always want, but the U.S. American empire is what I would call it. The idea that we can go to war with whoever, we can do whatever, we own the world. That's all the bankers. That's not Americans on average. So I just wanted to point that out. And so this idea that we would be tying our U.S. dollar to gold was the only significant fiscal policy that we had to hold up in order for us to maintain that. And so all this gold deposited, we'll get to it later, but we eventually were taken off the gold standard. And during that time, you can see this online, but a French battleship, just to give you an idea of the intensity, a French battleship came to New York Harbor to pick up their gold and take it back to France when the US dollar was removed from the gold reserve. They were still the world reserve currency, but the US dollar was taken off of gold. It wasn't comparable to gold anymore. It was just the US dollar. That was in 1971 with Nixon.
So you mean it's not backed by gold, so it's just...
Correct. So that's later.
So
we'll
then
get to
the
that.
French
Yeah,
were
we'll
like,
look at
But we'll
okay,
get to
let's
that.
get our money
Y'all
back.
go ahead and say the astrology, though, of the Bretton Woods agreement.
Gosh. Oh, Courtney, please. And I definitely want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, so during that time, I think it's interesting that Neptune was in an exact square with Venus. So definitely, again, this constant theme with Neptune is all about lies and delusion and deception, and lack of clarity and confusion and idealism. And so again, we can see this come up again where we have these ideals, we have these things that we're working towards, always on the back of some kind of crisis where people are vulnerable and susceptible. And it's just making the way for some kind of alteration to the way that we value our finances. And our Venus is in the 7th house of others. So it's involving other nations, other countries, and how they value their finances. And so it's interesting that we basically were able to kind of scam the entire world into giving us all of their gold. And I feel like that Neptune square Venus comes up a lot in this chart. Also, Pluto is exactly on the North Node at this time.
Right.
So
That's what I'm most excited about.
immense gain of power over others. And what else would you want to say about that, Ricky?
So, to be honest, I do see how we have Neptune in Libra at 2 degrees. At least what I'm looking at is in April 9th, 1994. And so that is trining on the South Node. We are repeated
1944.
back on the nodal axis for America at the South Node with all this kind of collectively taking care of the world in this kind of weird limelight. We are the saviors. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but it is kind of with that Neptunian South Node, we don't really see the whole picture. It's almost outdated. What I'm most psyched about is now, even though we look at the Federal Reserve in this negative light at this situation, the American dollar for America is now the leading currency in the world. And we have North Node in Leo. So we're experiencing a nodal return with Pluto there and Jupiter there. America's getting that Leo North Node badass kind of shine light that we're really coming in hot dog for the world to some level. I'm not saying that everything's on like perfect because of the element of the Federal Reserve train, but I'm really seeing Pluto on the North Node is a badass victorious changing the foundations of what we look like. I'm not going to lie, this is probably a huge spotlight of America's confidence, potential ego, but I really see like this is a moment at the end of World War II, America's looking like the hero in this picture. And by definite far on the 8th house, this is a legacy. This is Pluto in the 8th house on the North Node. This is a legacy for America. And I kind of think it's more badass than worse. For this particular chart right after the war, the only situation that I kind of see that's a little funky is Chiron on the South Node in Virgo. It's kind of like shining that light, but like we don't have it all figured out right now. Like it's kind of like we're like shining in it, but like our money pockets don't have it. The system, especially Chiron Virgo South Node, is like it's like you won the war, but it's in America is the Federal Reserve, but it's also like yeah, we also don't know if that's totally complete. Like if our wallet is totally taken care of.
Just so we're clear for historical context, you know, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, you know, December 7th, 1941, the Japanese had such control. It was all over an oil embargo, by the way. We just weren't giving them oil anymore. And because of that, they got super pissed and they bombed us because they were like, we have to go to war with this American empire. And so just so we're clear, we were supposed to lose that war. I mean, Japan had control of all the Pacific. They were even attacking Alaska, which wasn't even really American yet.
Right.
And so they really had us, and they had a larger navy than us. They had more control territorially than we did. The Japanese Empire, you guys take a look at that. It's huge. It's huge. And then Hawaii, of course, was under a constant observation. California had artillery set up everywhere. I mean, they were just it was the only thing that stopped the Japanese from invading American mainland was because they knew that most Americans were armed. That we are an armed populace. We were the only still at that time. So I just want to be clear for everybody. I mean, America was supposed to lose this war in every way, shape, and form. And Germany and Hitler was totally winning. It was because he turned on the Soviets that he even lost the war. He was going to dominate England, but he turned on the Soviets. There's a whole other genre of information there. But for America to literally turn their entire production houses, we're talking like Ford and all the automotive companies, and everybody just said, we're making Abrams tanks now, and we're going to start making weapons, and we're going to make bullets, arsenal. And we're going to, and everyone was, applying to join the Army, the Navy, and then this new thing called the Air Force. And so it was just kind of like everything there was, it was a battle to the very end. And America fought the Japanese by themselves with no other allies. The Australians helped a little, but they were still under the Japanese Empire. So America had to fight their ass off to actually win that war. And the war was still happening during the Bretton Woods Agreement. So the idea, like he's saying, I mean, we did not have it figured out. The Japanese still hadn't surrendered. We had not dropped the bomb on Hiroshima yet. We were still developing all that. And so I think that for context, this was a victorious time period. And it was, if we held our standard, at least we had a gold standard that we had our dollars attached to at that time. So I just wanted to mention that, this was a very powerful thing, which led to the 1950s, which we're not even going to touch. But the 1950s was the most prosperous time in America ever. Businesses, ideas, immigrants came here. It was just this huge empire was being built out of the 1950s. And so, I just wanted to mention that it definitely was, it was a hard war. And for us to be victorious, it seemed impossible.
I love it.
All right. So we are going to wrap up.
Just want to share one teeny, teeny.
Okay, go for it.
It's just hearing what Dylan's saying is America's Mars is 21 Gemini. And Saturn in 1944 is right on that Mars. So I'm literally seeing it's we're putting our energy here. Saturn and Mars, when they get together, it's hey, this is a work time. This is a focused trajectory time. We'll pay you if you really put in the work. So it kind of really shows when we were put to the test, we really showed up. And the last detail is Pluto is on the North Node in Leo. We're the ones that dropped the bomb, figuratively and realistically speaking. So it's kind of victory, but it was a boom. Protecting Pluto, plutonium, this was a big deal. So just kind of, I really felt that had to be talked about after World War II. I've never seen that till this moment, so it's pretty miraculous to look at. Yeah,
Pluto, one of Pluto's significations has to do with nuclear weapons and bombs. So we are going, energy in general. So kind of anything also beneath the earth as well. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit when we get into the future stuff. Okay, we're going to wrap up the history of the economy and everything that we're talking about with the 2008 real estate and stock market crash, which we all lived through and got to experience as children. That was a very interesting time. And in the astrology, we had Pluto, transiting Pluto, making an exact square to the midheaven. And every time I've seen the midheaven activated, it has something to do with our presence in the world. The way that our reputation is viewed as a country. And I absolutely think that it could have been a really scary time for other countries that are linked to our economy to see us go down, to see our reputation and our stability kind of start to crumble. And I think that Pluto squared to the midheaven really represents the truth coming out in that way and showing how unstable things were becoming and how it was built on kind of unlike lies. I'm going to get more into the astrology in a second, but I did want you to kind of explain what led up to the market crash or the real estate crash in 2008.
So what you had going on then was it was the Iraq war was still kind of a thing. It was coming to a close, but this was all based off of fake news that there was weapons of mass destruction inside of Iraq. Okay,
we all have heard that term so many times,
right? WMDs, and even presented to Congress. At least they had to hold up this vials of chemical weapons and saying that Saddam Hussein was doing all this stuff. He was a CIA asset that we built there. But the point is you see this sort of idea of America getting involved and entangled in foreign wars. And then that, of course, toppled a lot of our financial systems because if you watch the movie The Big Short with Steve Carell, Anybody here, you should watch that movie. It tells you a lot about what Wall Street, the 2 or 3 people on Wall Street that saw this mortgage crisis. When you lend money to people who can't afford their house, and you know eventually that the economy will slow down and these people will lose their jobs, right? Yeah, so before I get into the mortgage crisis, I wanted to kind of take a rewind on the history of the economic system in the United States, which is one of the most important parts, as we already learned about the Federal Reserve, and they confiscated all the gold, the income tax, the confiscation of the gold in 1933. 1944, the U.S. dollar is pegged as the world reserve currency, which means every country was using the U.S. dollar in order to trade. That was what was seen as the currency to trade in, which goes into really the history of currency itself, which is the agreement that we're going to use this monetary value for exchange of goods and services. That's why I don't believe in the barter system anymore. We do need money. Money is a good thing. But 1971 was when Nixon took us off the gold standard. They took the U.S. dollar off the gold standard. And this was when another panic set in where other nations wanted their gold back from the United States. So they came, and I was mentioning earlier about this French battleship that actually went to pick up their gold.
Right.
And so that's how important it was that we kept our agreement. But now we've been floating along with this idea that the US dollar is still the world reserve currency, but it is not backed by anything. So just to really give you guys a solid idea of where we're at right now is we have the world economic system is running off of the US dollar, which is backed by literally nothing. And we just hit $30 trillion of printing money that's backed by nothing, meaning that the people who privately hold shares inside of the Federal Reserve, all they do is they don't even print money anymore, guys. They just digitally type whatever loan they're going to give to the U.S. Treasury, which is our congressmen and women who vote for spending bills that then generate that money. And so now that's where we're at. And the 2008 financial crash was a symptom of a long-standing disease that has been interwoven in America, which is the banking and financial crisis that we exist in. And so just to go back to 2008, the mortgage crisis,
Hold on. That French battleship, they didn't get their gold back, bro?
They got their gold back.
Okay, good.
Well, if you wanted to brief on the 1971 deal real quick before we move on to
I really seriously did. Because, so you're saying basically put August 15th, 1971, Nixon removed the gold standard, and basically, boom. And then, but from that point, I'm laughing. France came with the battleship trying to get their gold back, but they could have taken a piece of the Statue of Liberty. Screw you, America. I'm kidding. But well, anyway, when I look at this chart again, I'm seeing stuff that always revolts to either by the Virgo South Node or Neptune, which there's a Mercury retrograde in Virgo. As this is happening, bad time to make decisions of getting rid of physical resources. I don't know. That's unbelievable. And South Node Leo, so we're having a nodal opposition. We're getting rid of this. We're going to do it for everyone else. We're going to take care of how things are done. And it's trying to be more progressive, but it's when it hits our chart, it's like almost taking us back steps in the way that I'm looking at this. Uranus, trine Uranus, man, there's too many things to pick, but of the main component, Pluto is trining our Pluto at this moment in time. There's something with exposure. There's something that's shocking the people. And I just find that right by that Neptune, it doesn't make sense. It's foggy in the illusionary platform. And though it's Leo, there's a big action. I just see something about this is not fully presentable for America's best nature. It's very it's trying to open up horizons for us, but it's also I genuinely can see Neptune on in the 12th house, just Jupiter in Scorpio. Something wasn't clear. There was something going on behind the scenes.
And Ricky, you're reading the chart for
that is the chart for August 15th, 1971, when Nixon wrote that.
When Nixon got rid of the gold backing for the dollar. Okay.
Correct.
Beautiful. All right. So let's just wrap up super quick with the chart of 2008. And as I already mentioned, Pluto is squaring the midheaven. So kind of destruction of the reliable reputation that the U.S. might have had. Pluto was opposite Venus and Jupiter at that time. So Definitely, you can see the challenge to the financial situation. And with Jupiter there, it's kind of blowing it up even further. And I think it's, again, whenever Pluto is having some kind of square or opposition or conjunction, there's a realization about the truth of the matter. So any like farce that is typically set up with Neptune that we've seen in a lot of these transits, Pluto having some kind of aspect is going to delete or bring the light to that lie. And so this Pluto opposition
Uncover.
with Venus, uncover, that's a good word, is basically uncovering where we thought that there was value, but it was more of this mirage or this image rather than actual value. And I think that's also something, again, that we can really see now, tying to the present day. People just typing numbers into a computer rather than there being actual value and tangible things to back it. And so I think that opposition could have something to do with that. And then, of course, at that time also, as Dill mentioned to me earlier in the day, that was the birth of Bitcoin. So we can really start to see, a challenge to the way that we have valued money by creating some kind of interesting electronic version that actually does have value through its limited resource. So what do you want to say about 2008?
I just want to ask a question for the folks back home. So we're saying in 2008 that the housing market had crashed. It's also symbolically the time when Bitcoin had been created and no one even paid attention to it. Hence, Pluto entering Capricorn. And I definitely want to chop it up. Is there a month that we can pick for the financial crash, like for 2008? I'm looking at December, though. But I just thought if that's going to bring more
Think of
accuracy.
election cycles.
Right, that's what I was thinking. Kind of the beginning.
November was the election for
Right.
Obama.
Right. So we can look at November if we want to, but
It was in the fall, I'm pretty sure.
yeah. Well, I'm going to look at December. Right now, Pluto enters Capricorn, right by the sun of the Federal Reserve. So it's like bringing a death and trying to restore something. It's definitely also exposing the ego of the entity of the Federal Reserve, laughably enough. And Saturn is in Virgo. Again, there's another harsh element where the Virgo is trying to like, hey, what is the, and not negative, but it's like, and we're like, hey, what are we creating here with this? What is the, and it should rule a physical property. It should rule like the physical amplitude, like this exists. What is this? And kind of refine what is working and what is practical and how can we bring this to the forefront? And it's on the South Node for the Federal Reserve. It's just a harsh moment where I don't think the Federal, and Uranus is on the North Node in Pisces. So this is crazy. The Federal Reserve is definitely getting like a really weird kick in the pants, if I had to say something. And as far as America's chart is involved, we are getting Saturn by the midheaven and Neptune at this time. So there is a vision. There is like, it's just as symbolic as just saying the housing market's crashing. The reality of the situation that you kind of put up some glitter on is really kind of coming down. But there's other solutions that are coming from kind of the ashes. I'm kind of seeing Pluto never just destroys something out of anguish and just tyrannical terror. It always leaves the soil for a rebirth to take place. It only is through the rebirth that something has truly died in a way. So I'm seeing just also Jupiter is on the Pluto retrograde. Jupiter's on the Pluto retrograde, which means it's inflating, literally inflating the financial process that, and it seems to happen every time Jupiter's in Capricorn for the last 4 cycles that we pulled up, including 2020, that it's inflating this Jupiter this Pluto in Capricorn in the financial house that's kind of exposing the kind of effed up foundation. There's just like there's definitely like skeletons underneath the foundation of what it keeps getting built on, like time and time and time again. And again, final note, the nodes have shifted. South Node in Leo. We're again as a nation not taking care of ourselves. We're taking care of other people, and that's in good nature. But it seems that when we have this nodal opposition, we're kind of always doing something maybe not in the best light of things. It's almost back a few steps. So it's my big share.
Awesome. So that is pretty much the history of the economic events linked to Pluto. You can see that there were quite a bit of involvement of Saturn, of Neptune, of the South Node. So these are typically things that I feel like, as we've said, have kind of felt like they were trying to help us grow, but maybe actually had some issues in them and involved a level of control in them. And so I just want you guys to keep that in mind, because as we look at this next Pluto return and how the economy starts to unfold this next year, I definitely think that we can start to see those themes play out again. So you don't necessarily want to just trust the vision that people give you for whatever it is at this time. Really think for yourselves. And I think that hopefully with the nodes being in Scorpio and Taurus, we will be able to kind of see through any level of illusion.
At least financial visions that America is creating, period.
Right.
Well, the last note financially is like, you know, and when we're off the gold standard, when we were the world reserve currency, we still are. That is our economic power, you know, because we're not producing anything anymore. And then we can talk about this in future podcasts and stuff. But the Chinese and what the deal that was made with the Chinese was that they were going to produce all the products, and America was a consumer nation, and we were just going to start consuming everything, and we were going to be the police force for the world. That was the agreement on the world stage. How we show up in the world is being a police, and then the Chinese would be the producers. But that's changed now, and so with the idea that we're the world reserve currency, like, we can't just cling on to that forever because it won't last. What we have to start doing in America is, like, again, bringing jobs back, producing things, like actually building things here, and turning this idea of wealth, this fake idea of fiat currency, this fake idea of wealth, and turning it into real wealth, which is producing products, growing real food,
North Node Taurus.
Yeah, and actually like making things back in America, whether it's a t-shirt or a couch. IKEA should be full of American furniture. Like, these ideas are just like, we have to start turning things into reality and resourcefulness, like we were in the 1950s when the Bretton Woods Agreement was actually a thing. From the 50s on until the 70s, we were actually really successful.
Well, the problem with that is that during that time, Pluto was on the North Node. So we were here as a growing power. But by 2027, Pluto will be on the South Node. And that's when the power starts to fall. So in terms of having us become the world reserve currency, that happened when Pluto was on the North Node. And now in 2027, my prediction is that we will no longer have the US dollar as the world currency, or world reserve currency.
It's also 2023 is really where Pluto is going to enter Aquarius next year. So that means it's already kind of waking it up. It's only until 2027 where we're on it.
Where it's
you know
exact.
what I mean?
So we could honestly see that unfold anywhere in the next, 5 to 7 years when it's still an orb. And so I think that there is a high potential for us to kind of fall down the rung of the ladder, because we were built up and inflated in 1944 with Pluto on the North Node, and now we're having the exact opposite. It's a decrease of power, it's a decrease of influence, and specifically our Pluto being in the second house, it's a financial influence. And so that's our prediction. You heard it here first. I'm just kidding.
The way we have to change is ultimately America has to start producing things here. They have to start valuing production. I remember Tesla was on Joe Rogan podcast, and he explained that building a car used to be a really proud job. Like, it used to be someone go to work to build a Ford or build a car. It used to be a really thing. Now they build them in Mexico and in China, and they build them in different places now. And so it's just little things like that. We have to start turning back to real ideas and real wealth, which means people need to start buying gold, buying silver.
Physical products.
People need to start acquiring assets. While the Federal Reserve prints all this money, you have huge investment firms like BlackRock. If anybody wants to learn a red pill, what BlackRock owns is over $10 trillion worth of wealth, okay? It's a big investment portfolio. And the people who own that company, right, who are they? And so we have to realize that, like, the real wealth is escaping us. And so in order to preserve our money, we have to buy real assets.
And that's why the nodes, the North Node of how we're meant to grow as a country, just shifted into Taurus, which is all about physical material things, the earth, the products that we produce, the houses that we live in.
in really high infrastructure, like if it is gold, if it is land, even good cars, making good quality products.
Good quality, long lasting.
Yeah, Taurus wants, you bought something, you want to last for a really solid, epic, good, enriching long time.
That's why the whole idea of Chinese goods and things like that. I mean, we're talking about slave labor. Imagine that. I mean, a lot of vegans talk about the idea of obviously animals and the slaughtering of animals, how they lived, you know. Well, imagine the kind of products we all have, the Apple Watch you're wearing and the iMac we all have, you know, like these products, the furniture in this room. I mean, it's like made by slaves. I mean, like, it's crazy. We used to bitch about slavery and we like tear each other apart about the history of slavery in America. I mean, that is a real thing right now, but we fund it by buying these products. We buy these products from China.
And that is a really good point, with the North Node being in Taurus, a Venus ruled sign, is not just the quality of what we're producing, but the values that we have behind it, the integrity that we have behind it. You know, what are we wanting to contribute to financially? Because the biggest impact that we can have as a people is our financial impact. So,
and we're beholden to countries like China, who produce everything we own, or that their companies are now over there. So it's like little things like that, where how about we start focusing here and start building things here, and it's well made. American products are always better made.
North Leo,
they're
America.
doing better things, you know, and they fund American workers. American workers then either pay their taxes, which I'm not necessarily for, but they pay their taxes, they grow their. People want a socialist dream. If you really want that, then you really should look at having jobs here, wealth here, everything here, because you can fund whatever projects you dream that you want the government to provide. But again, how much can we trust this government to provide these goods if they've already scammed us multiple times over and over again?
And sorry, I definitely just wanted to touch on everything with Dylan and all of us sharing, but like it is going back to that South Node Scorpio. Just when you're talking about the Chinese goods, this is a time where the lies or deception or any kind of total manipulation gets exposed.
it gets exposed.
It gets exposed to show you like where the real quality of things lies, basically put. Like,
Yeah, and the North Node in Taurus is all about being independent, actually. So when I see this in someone's birth chart, I know that they are supposed to be financially secure on their own,
seeking that.
able to take care of themselves, doesn't need to rely on people. And as a nation, we are asking, astrologically speaking, the planets are speaking to us, the gods are speaking to us, and asking us to create some sense of equilibrium by moving towards this ability to take care of ourselves, because we've, as a people, become too reliant on other countries, but also we've become too reliant on our government. Just think about if the power went out. Just think about if there wasn't food on the shelves. Like, we don't know how to take care of ourselves at all. And so if there's anything that the North Node moving into Taurus for these next 18 months can show us, it's asking us to become just more self-reliant in any capacity that we can start to reach for, even if it's just small steps, like growing some food in your garden or having some supply of food left over if the shelves do become emptier than usual, which we can already see. So I think this act of self-reliance is the only way to have true freedom, and that's really what we want on this podcast.
Last thing I'll say about the geopolitical situation that we're in, as I mentioned, the Chinese agreement and this idea that they would produce everything and ship it to us, you know, just on time, all this stuff, you know, well, the cost of shipping and all that are just as expensive as if we were to hire somebody here and build it. But what's more important is that the Chinese, as of the last 6 months, have just turned on this entire globalist system. And they've said they're trekking their own way. And that's a whole nother conversation. And so we have to recognize that, like, people in China and in Russia, I mean, they look at America as a failing empire because of the things we're endorsing and the kind of culture we're producing here. And they look at us as like pathetic, and like the idea that we could just hold up on a world reserve currency is just not going to happen. And other reasons, of course, the police force of the world. Look at Afghanistan. Afghanistan was just an example of a dying empire that is America. You know, and so we have to recognize that. And I'd love to move on to the topic of Bitcoin, because that ultimately will become a solution-oriented thing. That will become the next world reserve currency. And it will, for the first time ever in the history of the world, just so we're clear, will be money that's not tied to any government or any other entity. And people can think what they want about who made Bitcoin and who's Satoshi Nakamoto and all these things.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the money itself, it's sound, and it's perfect money. Money that is limited in supply, and it's not centralized. It's not controlled by any one person. It's controlled by a network of nodes, right? Computer nodes, and those things keep up the system going. It's the most collectivist idea I've ever heard, and it's just like this idea that money and contracts, and don't just think about it money and currency. Think about it as banking. If you got a loan that was in Bitcoin, it's a surety. It's a for sure thing. You know, it's
unless there's a power outage.
Well, no, there's more than that. There's more than that.
There's a lot of ways
we could do smart contracts
too.
Yeah, exactly. Smart contracts. These new crypto ideas. The crypto space is in response to the financial scams that we've lived in and had. Because a lot of people have these old people I know for sure on the radio. They're like they think the gold is still going to become the world reserve currency again. It's just not going to happen. And when Bitcoin becomes the world reserve currency, it'll be because it reaches the market capitalization of gold, which we talked about earlier.
You know, to really talk about this, and I want to talk about crypto a lot, and definitely Uranus, which rules this in Taurus, is about new currencies, new revolutionary ideas that the North Node will hit this year in 2022. It was big to look at like radical new ideas that actually are fruitful, that are very fruitful for all. And I definitely, to go with what Courtney's talking about, when we have Pluto in Aquarius within next year, this is what I kind of foresee is like we have enough knowledge, enough electrical communication with everybody. And, you know, it's not like in the past, I can't speak for all world currencies throughout the history of the world, but you would say gold and silver is universal anywhere you went. And so now we still have moved, though. Now we've broken it all down to American dollars, euros, you name it, whatever. But at this point, it's now we trade and travel and communicate with the whole world as large. And that's what Uranus, at least that planet represents, is how do we all come together on the same value system. So I find that just being very transformative, that it might be an ego blow for America to be on the South Node in Aquarius. Yet, though, in the whole stream of things, I just find like it's going to be rebuilding on a very integral basis. So I really see that very possible with Bitcoin. It almost opens up the doors for an oasis of opportunity at this point. So.
And also, I think it's important to mention, you know, with Uranus on the North Node, technology expanding to new levels for everyone. So, you know, Starlink being launched and internet having the possibility to reach anyone and even the most remote corners of the world opens up access to Bitcoin to the entire population. I think you said, only 3% of people are currently?
I wouldn't put a number on it, but there's they call them retail investors, and the amount of what we'd call retail investors, the regular folk out there buying Bitcoin, it only makes up about 3% of the entirety of the Bitcoin market capitalization, which basically means that it's institutions that are buying up the most Bitcoin. The people with the most Bitcoin are the U.S. Treasury, the Chinese, and then various other billionaires that own the most Bitcoin.
It's not the ordinary people. It's still not like kind of widespread yet.
It's never the ordinary people.
Not yet.
But it's like gold. So it's like, you know, whoever owns the most, it's not that they control it. It's like the Spanish Empire when they controlled the silver and the production of silver and the production of gold itself. That's a power. That's a real power. It very differently in Bitcoin. Bitcoin, although it's owned by a lot of these institutionalized powers, that doesn't mean they have control over the currency itself. And this is where we get new revolutionary ideas, which is the idea that Bitcoin, if I could finance a business purely off Bitcoin, the mentally capitulated people in Congress who would otherwise, you know, vote to inflate the currency, to print more money, because the more money we print, the more money in supply, the less value it has. So we just have to recognize that.
Okay, I want to talk about this because essentially what we're entering into, and that I do think is going to be a huge issue for all of 2022, is inflation. And I think this is a really big thing about the Pluto return. Is the second house is not only about money, but about value, how we value something.
Correct.
And so Pluto coming in here is basically saying that we're having a complete demolition of how we value things. And so this could go to our morals, this could be personal, but it's also going to our current currency. So meaning that we're going to have dollars that are not really worth much, and we're already starting to see this.
It's 7%. It rose in just the month of December, Dylan. I think it was 7% of inflation raise in 1 month.
And my taxes rose. like the utility bills rose. So basically,
Right upon this whole return.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So everything is increasing in price. Wages are not increasing at all. In fact, they might even be decreasing. So the value that
Still working.
we hold is so low. And so the money's not doing much. And yeah, I mean, people that I know that work in stores, they're like, yeah, we're marking things up like $20 or $5 for a small thing. And so it's becoming really clear that everyone is trying to make up for this lost time that we've had during COVID. And I mean, we're just seeing incredible amounts of inflation that can't just be resolved by marking up prices because people can't survive that way. So, I mean, where is this leading us?
Problem reaction solution again. Okay.
Exactly.
So the fourth industrial revolution was written by Klaus Schwab. He's the head of the Economic Forum, the World Economic Forum. And, you know, they want to use technology and currency and the economies to enslave populations. They want to subvert this kind of technology.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's their ultimate goal. And so we're in a battle for the ages when it comes to technology. Like, is technology going to be our ultimate slave, or is it going to empower us beyond measure? And I think it's a double-edged sword.
I have so much to say about that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
In another episode, we're going to do some AI episodes.
On
for
a
sure.
tiny note, though, I mean, when we've seen this, when I still look at Pluto entering Aquarius as kind of this kind of age of Aquarius mentality, but it does open up a lot of technological advances. So you could see like artificial organs, you could see a little AI robot, a little bit kind of maybe some Star Wars droid action or something
We already
like that.
have the Space Force, you guys.
I mean, but maybe actually like being an working entity. Maybe we actually are doing cargo ships to and back from Mars. It's like a real thing, but Pluto's there to kind of like disrupt even that. But it'll still show us like what you thought it was. No, it's going to get destroyed and be upgraded and get destroyed and upgraded. So
Yeah, so what we're seeing in terms of the inflation is just an economic weapon used against the people. And so what's going to happen is they're going to inflate the currency so much that they're coming out with something called the Fedcoin, which is the Federal Reserve's response to Bitcoin, which is a cryptocurrency, but it's the Federal Reserve making it. And so they're going to crash the economy in a controlled crash. And then they're going to say, hey, we need these Fed coins. And the way they're going to dish this stuff out is they're going to give it to you for free. They're going to make it like welfare. Just like everybody got their $1,200 check and then their $600 check from the government, the Federal Reserve is going to roll out the program and say, hey, you're going to get these Fed coins, and you're going to get these Fed coins for free. We'll give you a deposit of these. And these major banking institutions are going to start picking up Fed coin as a real dollar. We're already off the gold standard, so it doesn't matter what they take. The new delusion doesn't matter.
Up at this point.
Yeah, the new delusion is going to be the next thing.
Can we call it the corny coin? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, so we're definitely in for a battle of the ages, as I mentioned, as technology and globalization brings us all together, brings awareness to everybody. We're also reaching that point where they're trying to circumvent technology and use it against us to enslave people. So it's that balance between it. I mean, I would say that's the same thing as the drug dealers. The biggest drug dealers aren't in Mexico. They're definitely in Silicon Valley, and it deals with dopamine, the dopamine drug that we're all addicted to, technology.
Let's not go too far off tangent, but yes, technology being a form of control. I mean, okay, I don't want to go off too much.
I do want to talk about. I do want to
say.
talk about this but to stay with kind of. I know we left the economic system, but I want to talk about every time we've talked about the financial market and how they're creating stuff, and obviously we're looking for the next opportunity for whatever shows up. But what after the 4 or 5 charts we've looked at, from the Federal Reserve to the Nixon policy, there was like 4 or 5 the things we've talked about. I've always seen Jupiter or something popping up in the second house that's like exposing or just inflating. All right, so definitely of looking at the past and all the foundation for America, what we really got to look at and talk about was this enormous, like, whatever you want to look at it, but it was the eclipses in Capricorn that happened in 2020 right before this whole COVID fiasco. And to me, I looked at it as one of the most major eclipses. It doesn't really have a title, but it was a 6th planetary conjunction as Saturn conjuncted Pluto in Capricorn, all in America's second house. And however you want to look at it, it was just definitely the biggest storm on South Node for the Federal Reserve. This is like the biggest hole of inflating the financial market possible. And to me, it always looked like a cracking of the system, an inflation of the plan. There was a huge domino effect of situations going on. I was looking at this baby for 3, 4, 5 years. Okay. And I even moved to Colorado for this reason. And then right after it came off of it, as Neptune was on the Federal Reserve's North Node, trippy, basically just kind of, putting fluff into the air about it, then we kind of move off, and we've had this COVID situation where we're just printing money. We've given the checks to everybody. We've just been printing money, stimulus checks to everyone, to stimulate the economy. But we've just been printing money and doing all this stuff. And it's like, it's really made us kind of dependent on this very much so. And even more so if we're getting present day right now, 2022, people don't even want to work. People don't even want to get out and kind of do stuff to take care of themselves. And now our self-value, inflation's risen. So we're in this really weird bubble along this February 2022 where Pluto is right now right back where it was. It is returned, basically. As a forward-moving planet to an America's retrograde planet, we're really like in the rebirth right now with everything that's happening on the financial market.
The design of COVID-19, the whole pandemic, ultimately was to reset the world's economy. Okay, some of the biggest book called COVID-19 and the Great Reset. A lot of people have been hearing about the Great Reset.
Belief systems and situations of others.
This idea, economically speaking, was an assault on the economy because, it shut down the economy. What other thing could possibly do that? Nothing, literally. I mean, it was the best thing ever in terms of control and manipulation.
Which is Capricorn.
And that's what we have to look at, is what was happening in this time period that would allow such mass scale manipulation in the media, and how could they get away with it to shut down our business, to do these various things. And that's what they're doing to consolidate power, because if you wanted to take advantage of somebody in their house or something, like if you cause somebody to lose their job, you got them fired, ultimately that would lead to them probably having to sell their house or liquidate their assets. That's what they just did to us in America. They pushed us to a threshold where people in our country were so desperate that they had to liquidate their assets. And again, we're seeing the same thing happening with real estate today, where this BlackRock investment firm I mentioned earlier, they're buying up all the houses, not just like commercial real estate. They're buying up housing right now. And so you always want to collapse things and then buy them for pennies on the dollar. It's been happening in the third world for years and years and years.
Yeah, but the real estate market is booming. What do you mean collapse?
The supply of homes is very low. And so what I'm saying is that the reason why that is because BlackRock is buying up houses, like subdivisions, like massive amounts of homes were being bought up during the 2020 pandemic.
So what I really want to talk about, we were talking about the great eclipse that happened in 2020, which basically has 6 planets and the South Node all in Capricorn, Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn conjuncting Pluto, which is a big thing about the system, literally by the Pluto return. So we're looking at, there is a big financial cracking in the conveyor belt of how things have even come into the country. And like we said, the stimulus packages, directly in quarantine, the chart I'm looking at itself was literally looking at and it was also Mercury retrograde on Neptune. So this is a real big deceptional place, and that is the North Node for the Federal Reserve. So what I'm really trying to say with all that is that this is definitely a time where I feel like the Federal Reserve, it was definitely in its cookie cake of illusions right there. It's never been more of this is the recipe for a master plan to deceive and control people. When you have that Neptune and a Saturn Pluto conjunct, that is conveyor belt of domino effects that have been planned for a very long time, that were in place right off the course of that. So however you want to interpret that astrology is just blanketed. You don't get 8 planets to align like that. It did not happen since 1275. And that happened 2020, right before quarantine. So catching us up to modern day 2022, we're sitting here and inflation's gone up, no one's wanting to work, and we're really and it's the Pluto return for America happening right now, and we're kind of really reevaluating who are we, and that's where I want to stop from right there. But
yeah, and there is this thumbnail just going around on YouTube with a quote that said, "You will own nothing and you will love it," or something like that.
That's the Great Reset.
Okay, so
that's the World Economic Forum. That's Klaus Schwab. I've been mentioning him a couple times in this podcast.
He says
you
what?
You will, what was it?
You will own nothing.
And you will love it.
You will own nothing and be happy. but that's what they said. This in the future, and their idea they have timelines. They say by 2030. They said they want to reduce the population, different things. I'm not going to get into that today, but by 2030, that there will be this ultimate reset that they're going to have. It started in 2020, so they have these 10-year increments. And these are books that anyone can go and read and study for themselves. This is a plan, and it's not all perfect, and they're not all in agreement. There's a lot of people trying to coordinate things. They're not all in agreement. But what we have saw unfold in 2020 was sort of an agreed upon pandemic exercise, which, I'm not even going to get into it because we're not going to do that today. But there's a lot of what's going to happen that has already been predicted. It's already in their white papers. I call them white papers because when you look at these stacks of things, you have to read through them all, but that's what they're agreeing to. The World Economic Forum met last 2 weeks ago. And, this is the rebooting the economy, things like that. And that's why they're reopening right now. So for people like where we're living now, right this moment. Yeah. So on this day, they're reopening everything. They've decided to do that. But that's not because, the virus is over. It's just because that's what they decided to do. And so we're not living in that modern day and age. I've been saying this on my podcast for a while that the economic lockdowns they hurt the third world, more than anybody else. That no one cares about them. No one realizes that when there's no one vacationing in Tulum, Mexico, that's a problem for that city. That's a problem for that country.
Families need to make money and get
there's
food and
real
eat. Yeah.
people that have issues. When supply chains are hurting us, we just see it on the store shelves. The people in third world where they sell bananas out of Honduras, they see it in their life, in their entire livelihood.
The children and the whole infrastructure.
Yes, and this is the concept of the boom and bust problem, reaction, solution cycle we've lived in for obviously
forever.
Yeah, generations. And so they're trying to take advantage of us now in the same way. But obviously in the future, I want to cover that stuff. We'll move on. But there's ways that we as a collective can change that and be better and try to improve upon our own life and our lifestyles.
Yeah. And then the idea of owning nothing, I think, is something that brings up a lot about this Pluto return, because part of what we have seen a lot with Pluto being in Capricorn is the reduction to the basic needs of survival. And we saw this very obviously when COVID hit and they're like, okay, only essential workers. So then you get to start to see in society, well, who is essential? What jobs are essential? What do we really absolutely have to have to feel like we are surviving, not thriving?
Contributing.
It's amazing that there's a dictate that can decide who's essential and who's not too. That idea is of now brand new philosophy.
That's very Pluto too.
Yeah, and my ex who was working to engineer some stuff for the military, of course he was essential. can't stop creating weapons and things like that. But regardless, I think that that's something that we're seeing now, and also with the creation of the metaverse, as things become more digitized and people start owning property in a non-existent physical world, then I think we're going to start to see this idea of owning nothing, or this idea of, what is the bare minimum that we have to survive. So yeah, I would be really interested to kind of see how technology affects that, and how also the Neptune opposition affects that. Do you kind of want to talk about that? Because that's happening right now. Neptune opposing Neptune.
The things that are going on right now that I'm most concerned is, yes, literally what's going on for America's chart is we're having Neptune oppose Neptune, and right now Pluto is opposing the Federal Reserve's Neptune. So we'll talk about that in a second. But what happened over this last January for 2022 is we had a Mercury retrograde in Capricorn, and basically it went past over Pluto, and it's about to meet up February 11th. We're filming this February 8th. February 11th, on the Pluto return for America, Mercury will meet there. So I really feel like something's going to get exposed, and trining the North Node and the South Node. It's too in your face to not get some information got released. Some call to action was exposed. something is being brought to the forefront this next week, this Friday, pretty much looking at into Valentine's Day and so on and so forth. I think it's positive for some personal lives, but it's definitely pretty intense looking. But to speak upon Pluto opposing Neptune, I had an excerpt on it. It's just definitely like reconsidering what we think is ideal. It's reconsidering, like re-envisioning what do we think is ideal. So America should take a meditational timeout right now and stop doing all this crazy stuff and jumping into action and doing all these things. Actually take a moment to like reconsider, okay, can we be considerate of what has worked and not worked, and not disillusion ourselves to what we think has been ideal, because it obviously hasn't worked. And it seems with Pisces energy, where Neptune is which is opposing this Neptune, is there are so many other doorways and opportunities. You're getting so fixated on, well, let's just keep redoing this over. Let's keep just pouring concrete over the situation that may or may not be working. So I just see like something's definitely popping off here. And when it opposes the Federal Reserve's Neptune, that's cracking the glass a little bit. That's definitely waking something up.
Yeah, and everyone in their life will go through a Neptune opposition if they live long enough. It happens around every 80 years. So it's a time in which, you're confused, but you're also going through kind of like this existential crisis where you have to reimagine things in your life. But so basically it can happen in your lifetime, and infrequently, at least just once in your lifetime. But I think it's a time when
every 64 years you'll experience a Neptune opposition if you live that long.
Okay, every 64 years.
It's your retirement age right there.
Yeah, and that actually makes a lot of sense. That's
Thinking about ideals.
Yeah.
Rethinking what did I ideal and what's important about life. And not to get too big into it, but I think elders start picking up. I think they have more of like slowing down and appreciating life to the things they once ideals. So that's
but you're also losing an identity that you've had for so many years. So it's not just like, oh yeah, I'm going to skip off into the sunset and go plant a garden. Like, I think people think that's how it is, and maybe it is for some people, but an opposition inherently has some type of struggle in it. So I do think that in that reimagining, it can feel like you're on this really shaky foundation. You're really uncertain about who you are, what you stand for, what has meaning in your life. And so it's a time for you to release certain things that you've already kind of attached to and reimagine things differently.
So I just want to touch on this. A Neptune opposed Neptune. I pulled it from a book by Robert Hand. And it definitely, for whatever I just shared, part of me says the transit will not occur to anyone before they are in their mid-80s. And basically your consciousness will be very heightened, although your initial feelings will likely be of confusion. So willing to learn the lessons of this transit, you have to be patient and allow the universe to reveal what is shown to you. I'm not going to read the whole page, but basically put like you are definitely reconsidering how you've gone about your life. And for America in general is almost kind of like, let's really evaluate how America's been. Let's do an identity check. Let's go get the PowerPoint and look at where every place that America's been. Oh, that was great. Ew, I don't know about that, and etc. We're in that moment with this Pluto return. So it's not just things are cracking and blowing off. It's a moment we really should kind of, in my opinion, step back and kind of reevaluate over the trajectory of one's life. What do you want to experience? Because I feel like once you're in your 80s, your values are definitely changed about what you're going to do for the rest of your life.
And I mean, the fact that it's coinciding with the Pluto return, we're reimagining our financial stability in this country and our financial foundation. So can you clarify, is it in the 80s or is it in your 60s?
In my brain, I believe that Neptune does a year of 128 years. Maybe I'm getting that misconstrued. But like it's saying in mid 80s, you'll experience a Neptune opposed Neptune.
Okay. I also read that it was in the 80s. So I think that is
That's
right.
That's more correct. So part of me.
Okay, cool. So
No
yeah,
worries.
that adds a lot of context, because I think the level of confusion of like, where are we going from here? Like
What is America?
What do we stand for? What even is a physical good? Like all those things are calling into question. What is value? What is ownership?
And I feel
what
like
is money?
The workforce, what is an essential worker? Like I feel like everyone's in a little bit of a limbo thinking about like, well, I want to go to work, but I want to do something meaningful. And yeah, some of that has its own leeway, possibly laziness, possibly a stimulus check got us on our butts and stuff. But I also think there is an intentional thing like, what do I do in America to represent my life purpose is becoming very collective, I would say, for Neptune. It's like there's other opportunities to open up for us. And I think that's part of that too, just to share.
I mean, like reimagining the American dream. You know, like we're sold this American dream of you get a white picket fence, you have 2.5 kids, you blah, 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 like a medium wage. And I think when the pandemic hit and people weren't working and people were dying, I think people really started to question what matters. And I think that question hasn't gone away. And I don't think it's laziness. I think it's an existential crisis as a country that we're going through, where we're like, I don't want to go to work and leave my family all day when my family is the only thing that actually means anything to me. And so I think people are looking for purpose right now. And so I don't even know where I was going with that, but I definitely think that that's an important thing to mention.
I want to say where people are headed is like, look at the internet. The internet, if we could look at the birth cycle of the internet, it was like 91, the kind of original idea of the internet came on to being, and then later, 99, 2000, this is when the internet became bigger. And so if we look at the life cycle of the internet and how it has connected all of us, and like the fact that we can even record this right now and put it on the internet, like the internet is going to play a pivotal role in the future, and it's going to be important to connect with one another. And as you mentioned, like work and the idea of work, what does that mean in fulfillment? And I think that has to do with us being connected with one another and like learning what each other is all about, like learning from each other. I think that is going to like quantum leap knowledge and intelligence to a new level. I don't think TikTok is contributing to this new knowledge, but I do believe that these long form podcasts are very educational like this.
Don't hate.
I just messing. But like, the idea that we could sit and become more literary, like how often are people actually reading books? If we could turn to analog just as much as we're going into technological advances, we could actually find that blend, that balance. Like if you're reading, but you're also up to date with technology and you feel good about that and you feel modern and contemporary, while at the same time feeling a little antique and still doing the things that work, and that have always worked. I mean, Ricky talks about this, like buying stuff that I just take care of it and I furnish it and I make sure it continues to work for a long, long time. And that's how we should really be thinking about the future. And like if we just get things that we love and enjoy, they work long term, that's how America should produce. That's what people in this world should be doing and focused on mostly.
I mean, for me to add to American consciousness is definitely valuing, we're a hub of culture from immigrants and everybody included. So when I think of it, like the idealism for America personally, I feel like we're a hub to really bring not just inclusiveness, but really kind of like cultural understanding and being able to give that opportunity to everyone. But it should definitely be a hub of knowledge, in my personal opinion. So we have all the resources. There's no extra tools. We'll make more tools. But we have every toolbox to literally become in a hub, especially with the internet, and I can just look up astrology charts and anything, you name it, to bring that together and diversify world culture. It's an opportunity for everyone to have more education and more connectiveness than ever before in the world. The only thing is, it feels like we're getting distracted by dangling carrots of insignificant things at this point. And the consumerism has run a little bit rampant, and we all need a kind of a detox, in my personal opinion. And I mean that on a geopolitic social way, like a way that like people are connecting with one another, and there's like just violence and money and all these areas, like it's just a mess. And so it's like, Pluto kind of is, in my opinion, it's God bless it, however you want to look at it. Is it destructive? Yeah, but when something needs to go, it goes. But the greatest thing that I think Pluto helps restore and renew things and creates a Phoenix rising situation if America takes that to hand, just to share that with and North Node in Taurus is also exposing anything that gets exposed, is helping to bring us to that form of, we can re-neutrify and rebuild and be in the position, but we need to recheck our ideals on what really matters to us right now. And I still think there's avenues that we can branch out and diversify with Jupiter and with Neptune and Pisces.
Martin Luther King, he wasn't about change. He really wasn't about change. What Martin Luther King was about was he questioned whether or not Americans were living up to the American standard that was set in the Constitution. Like, is this document real, or is it just something that we talk about?
Right.
And it was about the natural rights. for all citizens, for everybody. And it was that there was a racial injustice that was in question at the time. But ultimately, we have to ask ourselves that same question today: is like, are we living up to what this document says? For most people, they've never read the Bill of Rights. They never really read the Constitution. They don't understand it. But if you look at that, it's that analog understanding. It's like, let's go back to what actually works, and let's stick with this principle, and then from this foundation, a strong foundation, you can build something wonderful. And I think that this cycle of what we've been living through in America has, I think personally, from the beginning of America and the way the financial system has worked in America, has been to circumnavigate what America could have been. And so if we could have a revolution of technology, a revolution or change in the way America functions, I think we could not just change America, we're actually living up to America's standards, like what it was originally founded for.
And that also has something to do with the Neptune, because that Neptune, to go way back to the beginning of this video, Neptune is ideals and imagination. And when it was in Virgo trying the Pluto and Capricorn, we were envisioning, hey, this common sense. Like, why not go back to like how we can really create an actual functional government for us to govern ourselves and live in that? That's never been created. Can we create that? And now we're like on the opposition of it. Totally ironic, as it's about to go in the furnace. When I look at Pluto, I literally think of old jewelry, like give me all your gold and silver and make it into a nice fresh brick. And I put it in the furnace because Pluto's a big restorer, going to bring death to whatever it was. It could make your grandmother's ring and all the history of America. But when it comes out of it, what are the ideals that are being principled by that? So that's a really good question for anyone watching this video, is how can you start the new America? Or like, how can you repave this new branching? Because when it's fueled by this Federal Reserve money and this financial market, the whole thing we've been chatting about, there's no real winning on that. And so we can rely on something like cryptocurrency, but I also think that's not the end of it. I also think there's so many more things Uranus and Taurus will bring for us, or something like that.
Yeah, so I did want to kind of wrap up with the cycles of Saturn and Pluto, because I think that it's going to show us a lot about kind of what might emerge from this Pluto return, because if there's anything you should know about Pluto, it is a very slow moving planet, which means that anything occurring is going to take time to unfold. It's not going to be this like rapid overnight thing.
Long time.
It's so slow, just like COVID. It's like, it's so slow that before you know it, it's 2 years later and you're like, oh, we are still practicing these protocols instead of those 2 weeks. Like, it comes out of nowhere, but it goes on and on and on and on. And so you look back and you're like, wow, so much has changed, but it's almost like you don't notice how much has changed until you actually do look back sometime in the future. So I did want to kind of talk about, again, the Saturn-Pluto cycles. So we kind of start off each cycle, which runs more or less 30 years. The current cycle that we're in, I think, is 33 years, if I'm not mistaken. So it starts off with Saturn and Pluto coming aligned into the sky, so conjunction, which happened in 2020. And then the first square occurs. So during the conjunction, a crisis emerges. And you can see this throughout history. So maybe like the First World War would start, essentially. Then the first square happens, which is going to happen in 2028. And this is typically when we see 2028, 2029. Yeah, it'll be like 1 degree in 2028. And yeah, that's typically when we start to see like an emergence of something. So some squares indicate change. It's a reaction to the crisis that emerged prior. So coming up with some type of solution to the problem, maybe a new person coming into power. So it's usually like a building up of something or new rules being placed on people in some type of capacity. So I could see us around 2028, 2029 having some kind of increase of rules or change of hand in power. And it is a little bit concerning to me to have a Pluto return in between this time, because we are weakening as a country before there is a new increase of power going to someone else or increase of rules. And so it makes me wonder where that power or where those rules are going to be coming from. So
can I share something on that?
Yeah.
So this is funny because it'll be Chiron. Saturn, when it squares Pluto on that first square that we're talking about, it's going to be conjunct Chiron in Taurus like it was in the Great Depression. And that square are natal nodes. 6 degrees Leo, 6 degrees Aquarius. 8 degrees Taurus Saturn. And that's like in our 6th house. So that's like 5th house. I really think that's like a really working time of back to the Brinks America, go back to building, go back to like really creating high quality stuff. But there's like a wound there because it's kind of like, I think of people like, I don't want to predict anything like very negative, but it is really looking at that as a work time. That's kind of like South Node is also by our Mercury. It's not in Cancer. That's definitely like you can't stay at home with your blankies. You got to go back and go get your butt to work kind of vibe. North Node Capricorn. And that's going to rebuild our system, I think, but probably really put us through. We're looking at 2028 right now of June. And that's just looking kind of a little bit foretelling is like, we probably have to like redistinguish these factions. But, being in the 5th house for America, you never know what could be created. Maybe we really are building a whole different kind of way that we express ourselves as a nation or really how we're being known for. But I just see something with Chiron there, with Saturn, by the nodes, is a work time for America. Like it's something to like rebuild, revisit, redistinguish, and pay our dues, so to speak. Unless you want to share anything on that.
Yeah, I mean, whenever Chiron's involved, I always feel like it's some kind of payback. Like, not to hate on the U.S., but I don't know. Like, things come around from the past and, like, bite you in the butt. And even if it's something that you're innocent in, it's just the past kind of comes back to haunt you in some way. So, yeah, I think that can be a time of discomfort, to say the least.
But we'll have Uranus back in Gemini, and Neptune will be trying the North Node. So I kind of feel hopeful for America in that place because it's also like revolutionizing. There's a lot of work to get done, but there's a great idea there. There's like a great new path opening up for America. If I had to foretell it and make a prediction, it's just going to take a lot of work to get it going kind of thing. Yeah.
So then after that in the cycle, which should be around 2035, 2036, the opposition occurs between Saturn and Pluto in this cycle. So this is what I termed like critical mass being reached. So some kind of war or economic collapse or bubble bursting of some sort. So like a massive realization, definitely sort of built on the previous crisis that initiated the cycle. So who knows what could happen then?
You're talking about 2036 when the Saturn opposes Pluto? The only thing I got looking at it is it's with the North Node in Leo. Like when we kind of won, it wasn't Pluto, but after we won World War II, we kind of rose to the top. We were kind of strutting our stuff at that point. So that could be intense, possibly a war situation that brings us into that field of redefining who we are again. But definitely intense time. I also think the philosophies of where America goes is something we never thought possible. But I think that's far out. That's 2036. But that'd be a very fascinating time to see how that transmutes. Like a lot of interesting power dynamics, a lot of things wanting to get built. But something about Leo, I do see something for America really like redistinguishing itself again, actually. But it might be pretty intense or however. So
one of the Saturn-Pluto oppositions was the Great Depression or a big war. So you can just see that that's typically the time in which things are kind of brought back down because through challenge. And then after that, we have a square again in like 2044.
Wow.
So
I don't even want to look at that.
Yeah, too far away, too far away. And then it wraps up in 2053 with a new cycle emerging. So we're just on this whole 33-year journey that started in 2020. So we obviously have no idea what's going to happen. So many things are going to unfold that we can't predict. But we just wanted to kind of show you guys what past cycles have led to, what history has led to, so that we can maybe get an idea of what a Pluto return could look like.
True.
Regardless, it's just some kind of new beginning in our value systems and our financial systems and our resources. And yeah, is there anything you guys want to add to wrap up today?
I'll just mention that a lot of these various people who write these books and think they control the world, okay? But I do think that they have to get the consent of the governed, is this old principle, but the consent of those of us in the public to do these certain things they like to do. These same people, they also know astrology. They know astrology.
They use astrology.
Really well.
Depending on who you're talking about. But
Exactly.
Don't think,
Like the British.
They know.
I mean, the Freemasons
There's a lot of-
definitely, and a lot of other people, but you got to know who's using it and for what. Yeah,
Exactly. And I just kind of wanted to mention how, like, some of these cycles that it seems like this YouTube video is looking at, that no one else, they don't really look at it. But at the end of the day, they are. That's what they plan out in the future, very far in the future. They have plans that they've had for like 50 years ago. And I'll give an example is like just the Chinese Empire, like 1949 was the communist revolution in China. Well, they saw it as 100 years, and they think in 2049 that they will have defeated the United States. That's one of their set goals. That's just one of the goals. There's a whole thing of goals, though, right? So now that's their own thing. They're on the Chinese year, though. They have, what is it, the year of the tiger now? Things like that. And
Water tiger.
Water tiger.
Yeah, so just saying, like, a lot of different, very strong, powerful people in the world, they look at these charts. They look at the same information, and they use it for their own advantage. And I do think that, like, ultimately, if people, like the average person watching this, isn't using astrology for your advantage, it's like you're at a disadvantage, because there are people utilizing this same knowledge to implement their idea of what they think is going to work.
But, Dylan's absolutely right. I mean, like, society never wanted people to know about astrology. And any one time you got something right, or, we can go into world history about this one with Constantine and stuff, but, they never wanted giving the power back to the people. And all we are looking just at the stars and studying patterns, and you find accuracy. I'm just going to be honest, after 10 years for myself, you start doing enough readings, or you're talking to enough people, you just don't make this stuff up. But you are open your own base opinion. But you best believe that people use astrology for whatever intentions. And so the truth is, if the energy's there, it's your intention that opens up. But personally, I'm open for more freedom fighters to understand the language, that it works with your own life and helps give me so much empowerment to like embody my own life. So it's at this point not something I would trade off or push to the side, like it doesn't matter to you at this point, especially if there's powers, good or bad, that would be using this. I mean, I even know that Ronald Reagan had a personal astrologer, and that goes far beyond what we can get into. There's even a quote that jokes like, millionaires, but yeah, like it really, I think, is encouraging to like really people like, they just have a self-awareness of their own chart and this journey, and kind of what you're even here for this life helps you really connect to like maybe as the whole in a grander way. So like, as far as we're concerned, would rather you be open to the knowledge of yourself than try to be reserved from it, because now with the internet and everything, that time's over.
I mean, there's so much I could say about that, but I think that was really well said. So let's just go ahead and wrap this up here. Thank you guys so much for staying tuned. Where can people find...
I was about to like throw it up.
Where can people find you, and what do you guys offer or will offer soon in the future?
Yeah, so Matrix Breakers is the podcast, and you can find that anywhere. If you just Google it, actually, you can find me. You can Google my name too and find everything, which is very convenient. I don't have any.
It's very controversial.
Yeah, I have a lot of controversy, but it's really not, actually. Everything we shared today, like, I go over all the documents. I read books to people. I just read you books. I'm like, the person you can just listen to and fall asleep. I'm just kidding. But, we go over history. We do various things in the podcast. And so I also inviting people to come on the podcast if you want to join the podcast and share your opinion or your thoughts about certain things, because I think there's people listening to this that might have different expertise. And then, I'll be also offering a various number of courses in the future, one being about the financial matrix, which we just discussed basically in this podcast or in this video.
Quite the majority.
The matrix, right? The financial matrix, which is the system of control that we exist in right now, in terms of our dollar and our value and assets and liabilities and various things to learn about when it comes to finances. So I go over that in this course that I'm going to be launching as well. So you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Dylon Suggs, DylonSuggs.
Epic. Love for you joining us, Dylan. You wanna catch me? I'm Ricardo Zivart. You can catch me on my Instagram and my YouTube at this point. I personally like reaching out personally, but you can find me on my Instagram. My last name is Zeevaert. It's hard to find sometimes, but and you can find my email. I'll have it linked up in the description or so. But I'd love to have a reading, do a session. I offer them. I've also done group events, so if that's something you want to get involved with, I'd love to open or invite you out to that. And honestly, excited to do more of these podcasts, more videos with you, Courtney, and also even Dylan, because like this was epic. This was great, and just looking to get the word out and empower more individuals.
All right. And of course, you can find me at willowsbloom.com. And of course, you're on YouTube. So Willows Bloom. I think I'm going to be putting this on my podcast, which I might rebrand and call something else. So I will link that in the description if I do. And I hope you guys have a bomb-ass day. Thanks.
Ciao.